Hello, I am Dr. Casey, and I created this audio lecture to give you an overview of the portfolio requirement, which is a part of your graduate field work and portfolio development course, SPECED 783. So what I plan to do in this lecture is give you a general overview of what your portfolio is, and then I will spend more time discussing the narrative statement, which is going to tie your whole portfolio together. So first, just a description of what your portfolio is. The Phase 3 portfolio is a collection of artifacts that demonstrate your competency in the INTASC and the CEC Advanced Preparation Professional Teaching Standards. INTASC stands for Interstate Teacher Assessment and Support Consortium, and CEC stands for Council for Exceptional Children. I have documents that give detailed explanations of the standards, both INTASC and CEC, on the D2L site for SPECED 783, the graduate field work and Phase 3 portfolio development course. It is worth taking a look at those documents because each provide more elaborations, greater detail on the standards and how to interpret them. And I think looking at those documents and reading those explanations will really help you when you're writing your narrative statement. The selection of the 4 artifacts that you will be including in your portfolio will depend on your previous coursework and experiences in teaching. Those of you taking the course are at different points in your teacher preparation training. Some of you are towards the end of your coursework here in our program. Others of you may just be starting, so your artifacts will not all look the same. And I will work with you to select artifacts that are the best match for each of the domains that we are going to discuss. Your portfolio will include a narrative statement. This is a reflective statement that will summarize the artifacts selected and describe how those artifacts demonstrate your knowledge and skills as described in the INTASC and CEC standards. Your narrative is going to conclude about 6 sections. So starting with an introduction, the introduction in your narrative is going to give a brief description of your philosophy of teaching. It is also going to include an overview of the artifacts that you selected for your portfolio. Following the introduction will be 4 headings in 4 domains. The first, learners and learning, followed by content knowledge and professional foundations. The third domain is instructional pedagogy. The fourth is professional development, and you will conclude your narrative with a conclusion that will tie your philosophy that you alluded to in your introduction and your description of all your artifacts and skill sets associated with those artifacts. Now I'm going to take some time and I'm going to go through the 4 domains that are going to be the meat of your narrative. So the first domain is learners and learning. And so in this area, you will discuss in writing how the artifact that you select demonstrates your understanding of learners with disabilities and supportive learning environments. You will also include evidence from 2 peer-reviewed journal articles that support your belief in these areas. So first, let me just take a minute and go through the 3 standards that are associated with this domain. The first is INTASC Standard 1, Learner Development, and here the expectation is that teachers understand how learners grow and develop, that they recognize that there are different patterns of learning depending on the individual, and that individual will vary depending on their cognitive, linguistic, social, and emotional needs, and that it is the teacher's responsibility to design and implement developmentally appropriate learning experiences. The second INTASC standard, Learning Differences. The expectation here is that teachers use their understanding of individual differences and diverse cultures to help individual students meet high standards and high expectations, and also to create inclusive learning environments. And finally, CEC Standard 3, Program Services and Outcomes. Here there's an expectation that as special education specialists, you can facilitate the continuous improvement of general and special education programs, that you expect to support and service students with disabilities at the classroom, school, and system level. So in this domain, you again are going to select an artifact. On this slide here, you see that I have bolded Classroom Management Plan or IEP Design and Implementation. Those are just suggestions of artifacts that you could select in this area. Some of you may choose one of those two. Others of you may not have those types of artifacts to discuss, or you may have different ideas of how you can demonstrate skills in this domain. And again, we can decide on an artifact that will be a good fit. It will be up to you in the end to select that. However, if you would choose one of these, such as the IEP Design and Implementation, you would be responsible for planning, writing components of, and participating in an IEP meeting. So your artifact would consist of some description of the planning that went into creating the IEP, the components of the IEP that you wrote or you participated in, and then a reflection of how the meeting went. If you have had a chance to see the IEP after it's been implemented and reflect on how that program is going for that student, you could include that as well as your artifact. And so in completing the activities associated with that IEP, since that IEP is going to be our artifact, you would then need to further discuss how that in fact demonstrates that you as a teacher understand how learners grow and develop, that you recognize that they have different needs and you need to create a plan that addresses the unique needs of that student. That you've considered that the student may come from a diverse culture or they may have individual differences in needs that is going to affect their learning environment. You have to account for that. And just the act of completing an IEP demonstrates that you recognize that students with disabilities have a specific program. They have a different program plan, and that they have different services to support their educational needs. The second domain that you will write and reflect on in your narrative statement is content knowledge and professional foundations. So here you will discuss how the artifact selected in this area demonstrates your understanding of curricular content related to the needs of students with disabilities, and you will support that with at least 2 peer-reviewed journal articles. There are 5 standards associated with this domain. First, in Task 4, which is content knowledge, and here there's an expectation that teachers understand central concepts and structures of the discipline he or she teaches, and that they are able to create learning experiences that make that content and that discipline accessible to learners. CEC Standard 2, curricular content knowledge. Here there's an expectation that teachers use their knowledge of general and specialized curriculum to improve programs and supports for learners with disabilities. There's an expectation in CEC Standard 4, Research and Inquiry, that teachers select and participate in research to inform their practice. In Task 5, the application of content, that teachers use differing perspectives to engage learners, that they expect their learners to think critically, that they create opportunities for students to collaborate and solve problems. And in Task 7, Planning for Instruction, here is an expectation that teachers plan and use instruction that supports all learners in meeting rigorous learning goals. For this domain, there is an artifact that will be required based on your completion of your Inclusive Strategies coursework, SPECED 761. In SPECED 761, which is a pre or co-requisite for this class, you completed a strategic implementation plan and some lessons corresponding to that. So for this area, you are going to explain how in completing that project, you demonstrated skills in these areas. So in completing this project, the skills involved in completing this project demonstrates that you understand your discipline, that you understand how to make your content accessible to learners, that you use research to support the practices that you adopt to teach, and that you can apply content in a way that engages students and expects them to think critically and solve problems collaboratively, and that all of this is done because of thoughtful planning to support your students in meeting their learning objectives. The third area, instructional pedagogy. Here you'll discuss how your artifact demonstrates your understanding of assessing learning environments related to the needs of students with disabilities. In addition, you will talk about how the same artifact or possibly a different artifact demonstrates your understanding of instructional pedagogy related to the needs of students with disabilities. And let me just take a second to talk about what pedagogy means and how that differs from the content area we just discussed. Content dealt more with what we're teaching. Pedagogy is the science or the art of teaching. It's the methods we use, the how we teach. There are 4 standards associated with this domain. First, in Task 3, learning environments. It's expected that teachers are able to demonstrate through a completion of a functional behavior assessment and corresponding behavior intervention plan that he or she can create an environment to encourage positive social interaction, active engagement, and self-motivation. For in-task standards 6 and CEC standards 1, both of which deal with assessment, the in-task standard identifies that a teacher needs to understand and use multiple methods of assessment, and the CEC standards refers to the importance of using valid and reliable assessment practices. And finally, in Task 8 has to do with the instructional strategies selected and an expectation that teachers will understand and use multiple instructional strategies to encourage learners to understand their content or skill. So these standards allude specifically to the functional behavior and behavior intervention plan, and some of you may have taken coursework in your program and have a completed FBA and BIP. If you in fact have completed that project, then that is the artifact that's recommended for this domain. However, if you don't have that artifact, you could potentially use another individualized assessment, maybe an academic assessment that was in depth and also demonstrates the skills associated with these standards. In addition, you can use your strategic implementation plan and corresponding lessons to also support your use of instructional strategies and methods to support an individual learner. So for this domain, you can use 1 or 2 artifacts. So if you were to select the FBA and BIP artifact, here you would describe how your work in completing the FBA and BIP demonstrates your ability to create an environment that is going to encourage positive social interactions. That in completing the FBA, you used valid and reliable assessment practices, that you used multiple methods of assessment, and that as a result of that assessment data, you created a strong instructional program or good recommendations in which a teacher could put in place to support the students' social and emotional, potentially academic needs. The fourth and final domain is professional development, and so here you're going to discuss how your artifact will allow you to develop as a learner and an instructor, and you will support that with at least 2 peer-reviewed journal articles. There are 4 standards associated with this domain. First, in Task 9, professional learning and ethical practice. So here there's an expectation that as a teacher, you will engage in professional learning opportunities, that you will continually self-evaluate your practice, and you will adapt your practice based on that reflection. For CEC 6, also dealing with professional and ethical practice, there's an expectation that as a special education specialist, you use foundational knowledge of the field to inform your practice in special education, that you are committed to lifelong learning and committed to advancing the profession. For in-task standards 10 and CE standards 5, both of which deal with leadership and collaboration, here an expectation that a teacher is going to seek leadership roles and opportunities to inform their colleagues, to collaborate with families and other school professionals, that you will use your collaborative relationships and your leaderships to set high expectations for your students and for all of those who work to support students with disabilities in your school. And you will be an advocate for those supports and policies. In this domain, you have a specific artifact you need to complete, and that is a professional development plan that is completed in your SPECED 761, your Instructional Strategies Methods course. In that course, you'll be expected to create a professional development plan proposal, and you will need to then describe how creating that professional development plan then reflects your commitment to ongoing learning in your field, that it demonstrates that you are reflective of your practice and you adapt your practice based on those self-reflections, that you do take leadership responsibility in terms of informing your colleagues or informing parents or working with school professionals to support the needs of students with disabilities. So those are the 4 domains that will really make up the meat of your narrative statement. I also want to highlight a few other resources that are available to you that will help you in creating your portfolio. First, you have a narrative outline document. That narrative outline gives specific instructions for writing your narrative statement, including some formatting guidelines that I did not discuss in this lecture. The 4 domains that I discussed, I took directly from that narrative outline document, so you will see those illustrated there. I didn't list it on the slide, but as I mentioned earlier, you do have the 2 documents of the INTASC and the CEC standards. Again, reviewing those will only help you in describing skills associated with those sets of standards. You also have a sample narrative. In that sample narrative will give you an idea of how to reflect on and write your narrative statement. And then finally, you have draft opportunities in this course as well. So I do expect you to put honest effort and time into those drafts so that when I give you feedback, it is very meaningful and helpful. Thank you for your time. Good luck in creating your portfolio.